The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an unnatural glow over the empty McDonald's lobby. Outside, the streets were deserted, an occasional car speeding past in the dead of night. Jason had always hated the graveyard shift. There was something unsettling about the silence, the way the usual warmth of the fast food restaurant drained away after midnight, leaving only the quiet hum of the fryers and the distant drone of the refrigeration units. The store was supposed to close to dine-in customers at 2 a.m., leaving only the drive-thru operational. Jason stood behind the counter, wiping down the register screen out of habit, trying to fight the creeping exhaustion that came with working this shift. He glanced at the clock. 2:47 a.m., almost an hour until his break. Then the sound came, the soft chime of the door sensor. Jason looked up, his heart skipping a beat. That shouldn't have happened. The doors were locked. No one was supposed to be able to enter, but there, standing just inside the entrance, was a man. He was tall, unnaturally so, his frame hunched over slightly, as if he were uncomfortable in his own skin. A faded hoodie hung loosely from his shoulders, the fabric stained and worn. His hands were shoved deep into the front pocket, and his head was slightly tilted downward, obscuring his face. Jason felt a cold unease settle in his gut. How had this man gotten in? He forced himself to clear his throat, trying to shake off the creeping dread. Sir? We're only doing drive-thru right now, he called, his voice sounding too loud in the stillness. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, unmoving. Jason's fingers twitched toward the register keyboard, unsure whether to call his manager or security. Something about the man's stillness was deeply wrong. He wasn't looking around, wasn't checking the menu, wasn't even acknowledging Jason's presence. He just existed in the doorway like a shadow that had somehow stepped into reality. Jason swallowed hard and took a hesitant step forward. Sir, the man finally moved, his head tilting upward at an unnatural angle. Jason's breath caught in his throat. His face was pale, almost waxy, and his features were just off. His skin looked stretched too tightly over his skull, and his eyes, black, completely black. No whites, no pupils. Just two empty voids staring straight at Jason. Jason stumbled back, his pulse hammering in his ears. His mind raced. Was this some kind of prank? A mask? But the longer he stared, the more he realized that the man wasn't blinking. He wasn't breathing. And then he smiled. Jason's stomach twisted. The grin was too wide, too sharp, stretching inhumanly across his face as if his skin were struggling to contain it. Jason's hands clenched at his sides, panic beginning to rise in his throat. He wanted to run, to bolt straight out of the restaurant, but his feet felt glued to the tile. Then, just as suddenly as he had smiled, the man moved. It wasn't a normal movement. He didn't walk. He shifted, appearing inches closer without any visible motion. Jason's body finally reacted, jerking backwards so hard he hit the counter. His breath came in short gasps. He reached for his phone in his back pocket, fingers fumbling, but when he looked up again, the man was even closer. Jason's entire body screamed to move, but fear had its claws sunk deep into his chest. The man's grin never wavered, his black eyes unblinking, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above like two polished stones. Then, in the silence, Jason heard something. A whisper. No, not one whisper, many. A chorus of voices, murmuring just beneath the hum of the restaurant's machines. The words were indistinct, slithering into his ears like a dark tide, crawling into his mind. Jason squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head, willing the noise away. When he opened them again, the man was gone. The entrance was empty, the door still locked. But the air in the restaurant felt different. Thicker, heavier, as if something unseen had settled into the space. Jason's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, unlocking it with clumsy fingers, and dialing his manager's number. No signal. His stomach dropped. That was impossible. He had full bars just moments ago. Then from behind him, the whispering started again. Jason turned, his breath catching in his throat. The restaurant security cameras were mounted above the counter, their small screens showing the different areas of the store. And there, in the grainy black and white footage of the lobby, the man stood. Except he wasn't alone. The screen flickered. distorting for a split second, and then the lobby was filled with shadowy figures. Dozens of them, some standing, some crouching, their faces obscured by darkness, but all of them staring at the camera. At him. Jason's heart slammed against his ribs. He whirled around, expecting to see them behind him, but the lobby was empty. A static crackle from the monitor made his skin prickle. The figures hadn't moved, but the image was growing darker, the shadows in the room deepening unnaturally. Jason's breath came in ragged gasps as he backed toward the office. His only thought now to lock himself inside and wait until morning. Then the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the restaurant in an instant. The only light came from the dim glow of the fryers and the blinking security screens. Jason's chest tightened as he reached blindly for the office door, his fingers brushing against the cold metal handle. And then he felt it, a breath against the back of his neck. He didn't think. He ran. Jason bolted to the kitchen, knocking over trays and supplies as he sprinted toward the emergency exit. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might explode. He shoved against the door, expecting the alarm to blare. Nothing. The door wouldn't budge. A reflection in the fryer glass caught his eye. He turned and his stomach dropped. The man was standing right behind him. Jason screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the overwhelming static, now roaring in his ears. The man's grin had stretched impossibly wide, his jaw unhinging like a snake's. His black eyes gleamed in the dim light, and then the world blinked, just for a second, like reality itself had glitched. When Jason's vision cleared, he was outside. The sky was starting to lighten with the approach of dawn. He stood in the empty parking lot, breathless, heart racing. The restaurant was silent behind him, its windows dark. There was no sign of movement inside, no sign that anything had ever been there. Jason staggered backward, his entire body trembling. He fumbled for his phone again. This time, the signal bars were back. He called his manager, his voice shaking as he tried to explain what had happened. But there was nothing to explain. The security footage from that night showed nothing unusual. No man, no figures, no power outage. Just Jason, standing alone in the restaurant, staring at nothing. His manager told him to take the rest of the week off. Jason never went back. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that settled thick in the air. It was nearly 3 a.m., and Tom had been working the McDonald's drive-thru for the past 4 hours, fighting off exhaustion with the help of stale coffee and the dim glow of the overhead monitors. The roads were mostly empty, an occasional car passing by, but business had slowed to a crawl. The crackle of the headset startled him. The drive-thru sensor had detected a vehicle. He straightened up, rubbing his eyes before pressing the button. "Welcome to McDonald's. What can I get for you tonight?" A brief pause, then a voice crackled through. "Yeah, just a cheeseburger and a Coke." Tom frowned. The voice sounded distant, almost hollow, like it was coming from an old radio rather than a car speaker. But he had dealt with stranger things during night shifts. "Got it. That would be $5.49 at the second window. Drive on up." The headset clicked off. He glanced at the monitor, expecting to see the car approaching the window. The grainy security feed showed a dark sedan, idling in the drive-thru lane, headlights casting long shadows against the pavement. But something about it seemed wrong. The headlights weren't reflecting off anything, as if the car weren't really there. The image itself flickered slightly, distorting in a way that sent an uneasy feeling crawling up Tom's spine. Shaking it off, he turned to grab the order. He moved quickly, tossing the wrapped burger into a bag and filling the Coke with ice and soda. By the time he reached the window, he expected the car to be there, waiting. Instead, there was nothing. The lane was empty. Tom blinked, leaning out slightly to peer into the darkness. He looked at the monitors again. The car was still there. The same static flicker warped the image. But outside, there was no one, no headlights, no engine sound, nothing. A chill ran down his spine. He hesitated before tapping the headset. Hello? Sir? Are you still there?" Silence. He glanced at the monitor again, his stomach twisting. The car hadn't moved, still sitting there, waiting. But now, the driver's side window was down, and there was someone inside. His breath caught in his throat. The figure in the car wasn't moving. He couldn't make out the face, just a vague shape, shrouded in darkness. The longer he stared, the more the static seemed to distort the image, as if the camera itself was struggling to process what it was seeing. He looked back outside. The lane was still empty. No car, no driver, no sound. A low hum filled the air, barely noticeable at first. Then it grew louder, vibrating in his ears, making his teeth ache. It wasn't coming from the headset. It wasn't coming from anywhere. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The monitor flickered. The car was gone. Tom felt his stomach drop. He frantically flipped through the security feeds, rewinding the footage. There was the car, idling. There was the driver, sitting motionless. And then, nothing. One frame, the car was there. The next, it had vanished. No movement. No fade out. Just gone. As if it had never been there at all. A shiver ran through him. He tapped his headset again, trying to convince himself that maybe this was just a technical glitch, a malfunction with the cameras. But then something changed on the screen. The security feed for the drive-through lane flickered again, distorting wildly for several seconds before settling into focus. The car was back, but this time, the driver was standing outside of it. Tom's breath hitched. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, their body obscured by shadows. He couldn't make out any features, just a faint outline of a head tilted slightly to the side. The figure didn't move, didn't seem to breathe. It just stood there, staring at the camera, staring at him. His heart pounded in his chest. He turned to look outside, fully expecting to see the same figure standing in the empty drive-through lane. But there was nothing. When he looked back at the screen, the figure had moved. Closer. Tom swallowed hard, his hands gripping the counter for support. His mind screamed at him to do something. Close the window, run, call someone, but he couldn't move. His feet felt glued to the ground. Then, the monitor glitched again, static filling the screen for half a second. When the image returned, the figure was gone, but something had changed. The drive-through speaker crackled to life, and this time, the voice that came through wasn't distant or hollow. It was right next to his ear. "I never got my order." Tom spun around so fast, he nearly fell, his breath coming in sharp gasps. But the restaurant was empty. The kitchen, the counters, nothing was out of place, except for one thing. The Coke cup, the one he had filled for the customer. It was gone. The headset fell to the ground as he stumbled back, his pulse hammering against his ribs. He looked back at the security monitors one last time, dreading what he might see. And there it was, a single frame frozen in time. The drive-through lane, the car, the driver. And then the next frame, nothing. No car, no driver, no shadows, just an empty parking lot, as if nothing had ever been there to begin with. Tom didn't finish his shift that night. He clocked out, left without a word, and never returned to the job again. But the next morning, when the opening crew arrived, they found something strange at the second window, a McDonald's Coke cup, filled to the brim with blood. The dinner rush had ended, leaving McDonald's eerily quiet. The overhead lights cast a yellow glow across the empty booths, and the hum of the kitchen had died down to a low murmur. It was nearing 9 p.m., and most of the families had cleared out, except for one. A woman sat near the play place with her young son, who was gleefully climbing the plastic tunnels. She checked her phone absently, sipping the last of her drink. The play place was nearly empty, save for another child who had been there earlier but had since left. The employee at the counter, Sam, noticed her suddenly stiffen. Her gaze locked onto the enclosed play area. She stood up, her voice uncertain. "Excuse me?" Sam looked up. "Yes, ma'am?" There's a man in there." Her voice wavered slightly. She pointed toward the play place, eyes never leaving it, sitting in the tunnel, watching. Sam frowned. He could see her son crawling through the plastic tubes, but there was no one else in sight. "I don't," he started, but she cut him off. "He's there, in the red tunnel just past the slide." Her voice had an edge of panic now. Sam's stomach tightened. He grabbed a flashlight from behind the counter and walked toward the play place. The plastic structure groaned under the weight of the air conditioning, an occasional creak echoing through the empty restaurant. He hesitated at the entrance, glancing up through the plexiglass windows. Nothing. No man. No movement. Just the soft sound of the little boy giggling as he crawled through the tubes. "There's no one there," Sam said, turning back toward the woman. She was pale now, gripping her phone tightly. "I saw him. I swear I did. He was just sitting there, watching." Sam glanced back at the play place. His unease was growing, but there was nothing to suggest anything was wrong. Maybe she was just tired, seeing things in the dim lighting. He nodded reassuringly. "I'll check the security cameras just in case. But I promise there's no one there." The woman didn't look convinced, but she nodded, calling her son down from the structure. "Come on, honey, let's go." As they left, Sam exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Something about this didn't sit right. He went to the back office, flipping through the security feeds until he found the play place camera. He rewound the footage a few minutes to the time she had first called out. At first, everything seemed normal. The child crawled through the tunnels, laughing. The mother sat at the table, sipping her drink. Then a shadow shifted. Sam's blood ran cold. In the red tunnel, past the slide, where she had pointed, there was something, a dark figure. A man. He sat completely still, hunched forward slightly, his face obscured in the dim lighting. He wasn't playing. He wasn't moving. He was just watching. And then, just as suddenly, he was gone. No movement. No crawling. No climbing. One frame he was there, the next, nothing. Sam's breath came in short gasps. He rewound, played it again. Same thing. There, then gone. His fingers trembled as he clicked to check the timestamp. The figure had been there for over 10 minutes, watching the child, unmoving, but no one had ever seen him leave. The late-night shift at McDonald's was usually uneventful. Fewer customers, less noise, and just the occasional drive-through order to break the monotony. Amber, the only front-end employee on shift, spent most of her time wiping down counters, refilling sauces, and checking her phone in the brief moments of quiet. It was nearing 2 a.m. when the chime above the door rang, signaling a customer. Amber looked up from her phone, expecting to see some tired trucker or a teenager grabbing a late-night snack. Instead, a man walked in, tall, gaunt, wearing a faded gray hoodie pulled low over his face. He didn't approach the counter. He didn't glance at the menu. He just walked straight toward the restroom without saying a word. Amber frowned. She hated when customers did that. Sometimes, homeless people would come in to clean themselves up, and it usually wasn't a big deal. But something about the man felt off. The way he moved, the way the air seemed to change when he passed by, as if the room had gotten colder. Shaking it off, she went back to wiping the counters. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The man still hadn't come out. A weird sense of unease crawled up her spine. She glanced at the security monitor that showed a grainy feed of the restroom hallway. No movement, just a closed door. Amber sighed. "All right, buddy, time's up." She walked toward the hallway, hesitating for just a moment before knocking on the restroom door. "Sir, are you okay in there?" No answer. She knocked again, harder. "Hello? You can't just stay in there all night." Silence. A chill settled in her stomach. Something wasn't right. Carefully, she reached for the handle and pushed the door open just an inch. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting a buzzing glow over the empty space. Empty. The stalls were open. The sinks were dry. The air was stale and undisturbed. The man was gone. Amber's breath hitched. There was no way he could have left. She had been watching the monitors. No one had exited the restroom. No one had left the building. He had simply disappeared. Her hands trembled as she stepped inside, looking around in disbelief. That was when she noticed the mirror. It was smeared, Long, dark streaks ran down its surface, as if something had dragged its fingers through condensation. But the glass wasn't fogged up. Her reflection stared back at her, wide-eyed, breath shallow. Then it smiled. A slow, unnatural grin stretched across its face, one that did not belong to her. Amber stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The reflection raised a hand, pressing its palm against the glass, leaving a dark, wet imprint. She turned to run, but as she did, the restroom door slammed shut behind her, locking her inside. And in the mirror, her reflection stayed, watching. Amber pounded on the door, screaming for help, but the heavy thud of her fists was swallowed by the eerie silence. She turned back to the mirror, breath hitching as her reflection tilted its head unnaturally, still smiling. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, it lifted a finger to its lips. Sure. Amber's own hands were shaking, but her reflection remained eerily still. Then, without warning, it stepped forward. Amber staggered back, slamming against a stall door behind her, heart hammering. The glass rippled as if it were water, and the reflection began pushing through, its body distorting in impossible ways. She wanted to run, wanted to scream, but her body refused to move. The thing emerging from the mirror looked like her, but it wasn't. The lights flickered wildly. The air in the restroom grew thick and humid, and the sickly scent of something rotting filled Amber's nostrils. The reflection stepped out fully, identical in every way except for its eyes, empty, black voids that swallowed the dim light. Amber finally regained control of her legs and lunged to the door, yanking at the handle desperately. It wouldn't budge. Behind her, she could hear the soft, deliberate footsteps of the imposter approaching. Then a voice, her own voice, but wrong. You don't belong here. Amber whirled around, pressing her back against the door, her breath coming in frantic gasps. The doppelganger cocked its head, an amused expression stretching across its face. It took another step forward, reaching out a hand. Amber squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for something, anything, and then the door burst open. She fell backward onto the cold tile of the hallway, gasping as the fluorescent lights of the restaurant flooded over her. The air smelled normal again. The pressure in the room was gone. Scrambling to her feet, she turned to look back inside the restroom. It was empty. The mirror was clear, her reflection normal. No smears, no strange expressions, no doppelgangers. The restroom door creaked as it slowly shut on its own, settling back into place with a quiet click. Amber didn't waste another second. She bolted toward the break room, grabbed her things, and ran straight out of the building. She didn't care about clocking out. She didn't care about explanations. She just knew one thing. She was never working the night shift again. And as she sped away, she failed to notice the faint imprint on the restroom mirror. A handprint, pressed against the glass from the inside. It was just past midnight when Jordan clocked into his shift at the 24-hour McDonald's on the outskirts town. He had worked the graveyard shift for months now, and though it was monotonous, it was usually quiet. The occasional late-night customer, truckers stopping for coffee, and a handful of drunk partygoers looking for greasy food were the norm. But this night was different. It started with the register acting up. The screen flickered, refusing to process orders, and then, without warning, the screen filled with static before shutting off completely. Jordan sighed. Technical issues were common at night, but this felt different. He reset the system, and after a long pause, it rebooted. But as soon as it turned back on, something strange appeared on the screen. A single phrase, typed out in dull gray font. I never left. Jordan frowned. He had never seen an error message like that before. He glanced around the empty restaurant, suddenly feeling uneasy. Shrugging it off, he figured it was a glitch and continued setting up for the night. Around 1 a.m., a customer walked in. It was an older man, dressed in a faded brown coat, his hat pulled low over his face. He moved slowly to the counter, his presence unsettling but not outright alarming. Jordan greeted him, asking what he'd like to order. The man didn't respond. He simply pointed at the menu behind Jordan. All right, 1 Big Mac combo coming up, Jordan said. Ringing it up, that'll be... When he looked back up, the man was gone. Confused, Jordan leaned over the counter and looked around. The door hadn't chimed, and there was no one in the dining area. He checked the bathrooms. Empty. He even peered into the parking lot, but the lot was completely still under the harsh glow of the streetlights. Feeling unsettled, he returned to the register and noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. The order had been completed, paid in full. The receipt printer whirred, spitting out a slip of paper. Jordan hesitated before picking it up. There was no card number, no cash transaction, just a name, Daniel Carter. The name stirred something in the back of Jordan's mind. It felt familiar, but he couldn't place it. Brushing the unease aside, he continued his shift, trying to ignore the eerie feeling creeping up his spine. At 3 a.m., he decided to take a break. The restaurant was empty, so he sat down in one of the booths, sipping on a soda while scrolling through his phone. His co-workers in the back were busy with prep work, so he was alone in the front. Then the register dinged. An order had been placed. Jordan's stomach twisted. He hadn't seen or heard anyone walk in. Slowly, he approached the counter and checked the screen. One order, a Big Mac combo. The exact same order as before, paid in full, and the name on the receipt, Daniel Carter. A wave of dread settled over him. Something wasn't right. He stepped away from the register and decided to check the security cameras. As he rewound the footage, his blood ran cold. The footage showed the front counter, the empty dining area, the empty parking lot, and then the register screen lit up by itself. The order appeared, the receipt printed. There was no customer. No one had been there at all. Jordan's hands trembled as he searched the name online. His heart pounded as an old news article appeared. Local man Daniel Carter found dead in McDonald's parking lot, 1986. Asterisk, asterisk. The article explained that Carter had suffered a fatal heart attack while waiting for his food in the drive-thru. He had never received his final meal. Jordan looked up, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The register dinged once more. Another Big Mac combo, paid in full, and somewhere just beyond the glow of the golden arches, a shadow lingered near the drive-thru window.